Hello everybody, my name is Cameron and today we're going to be looking at organizing animals and plants, specifically to do with the blood, the heart disease, breathing, as well as plant tissues and organs. So let's look at the blood. The human circulatory system is made up of the liquid blood component, blood vessels which are carriers of this liquid blood, as well as the heart to give motion to this liquid blood. The functions include providing oxygen for cells, and a steady amount of oxygen at that, as well as taking away carbon dioxide that they would have made during cellular respiration, providing them with nutrients and minerals that the cell may need to function, as well as removing any waste such as urea from these cells. So the liquid component to the circulatory system, the blood, is made up of four main components. Namely the plasma. This is the mostly water part of the blood that gives it a medium to move around in. Okay. The red blood cells, which are cells within this plasma that are adapted to carrying oxygen and carbon dioxide between cells. They contain hemoglobin, which is the red pigment that gives them their color, that binds with oxygen. They're also shaped sort of concave to increase the amount of surface area that they have. White blood cells are much bigger than red blood cells, and they are part of the body's defense system. So they are made of lymphocytes, which create antibodies against specific microbes and antitoxins against the poisons made by those microbes. So you might have some lymphocytes that will attack mainly the bacteria, while others that will be specialized to attacking the toxins that the bacteria makes that will make you sick. They also compose of phagocytes, which engulf and digest bacteria and viruses and have the same response to any pathogen. So this includes nematodes, parasitic worms. They will identify it, engulf it, and digest it. So a lot of the time when it comes to an infection and you get that pussy liquid, that pus is actually white blood cells fighting off an infection. And then you have platelets. Now what platelets do is they cause your blood to clot when you are cut. Okay, once exposed to oxygen, these platelets sort of branch out and form a mesh, and that stops your blood from leaving your body really, and it's going to form that blood clot. Now people with people with hemophilia lack those platelets, and so if you do not produce platelets, if you get cut, you're going to continue bleeding until you close it up with a plaster. So that's people with hemophilia. They just profusely bleed. If you get a nosebleed, it can be quite dangerous for you. Now when it comes to the blood vessels, the transporters of blood, we're going to have three different types. The first are arteries. Now arteries are usually going to be carrying oxygenated blood away from the heart. They are carrying this blood at very high pressures, so they are going to have a thick muscular wall that will allow them to take this pressure as well as change their shape. This can help with temperature control, which we will be going over in homeostasis in chapter 12. They're also going to have a smaller lumen. Now the lumen is the actual hole of the blood vessel. So arteries are going to have a smaller lumen and more muscular to keep that pressure as high as possible to get oxygen to the body as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. Veins, on the other hand, carry deoxygenated blood towards the heart. Now this isn't as vital as oxygenated blood, so veins have a lot thicker, bigger lumen, thinner walls, so the blood is not going at such high pressure, as well as valves. Now because of the lack of pressure, they need these valves to prevent the blood from flowing back to the rest of the body. And finally, we got capillaries. Now, capillaries are kind of like the middle point between arteries and veins where gaseous exchange and nutrient exchange and waste exchange will occur. So they are very thin, and this allows for it to be easily transferred. And finally, the heart. So the heart is the pump that moves the blood through the body, through these blood vessels. In most mammals and in all humans, we have something called a double circulatory system. Now what that means is blood is going to flow through the heart twice. Deoxygenated blood is going to be pumped into the heart. It's then going to be pumped to the lungs, gets oxygenated, then going back to the heart. That's the second time it's been in the heart. From that point, it's going to then be pumped to the rest of the body as oxygenated blood. So it's a double circulatory system. This double circulation is important for warm-blooded mammals as it's more efficient for energy production. Okay, here we see a diagram of the lung. It's probably important for you to start learning these points and to get familiar with which sides are carrying oxygenated and which are carrying deoxygenated. So coming from the deoxygenated blood from the body, it is your vena cava or vena cava, however you want to say it, that will be taking that deoxygenated blood from the top through the superior or the bottom of the body through the inferior. These both travel to the right atrium. Now I say right because it's always based on the person whose heart it is. So you'd have to turn yourself around. Okay. So they go to the right atrium. From the right atrium, they're going through these tricuspid valves. Now what these tricuspid valves do is again prevent backflow when the muscle contracts to push that blood to wherever it's supposed to go. Otherwise, the blood would enter the right ventricle, and when that squeezes to push it to the lungs, it would just go back to the right atrium. So we need those tricuspid valves to allow for unidirectional flow of blood. So from the right ventricle, it is going to push it into the pulmonary arteries. Again, arteries away from the heart, veins towards the heart. So these pulmonary arteries, although they are containing deoxygenated blood, they are moving it away from the heart towards the lungs. Once it gets oxygenated at the alveoli and the capillaries, okay, within the lungs, it comes back oxygenated through the pulmonary veins. Veins, again, although it's oxygenated, it's going towards the heart. So through the pulmonary veins from the right and left lung, it's going to enter the left atrium. Then it is going to enter the left ventricle. And as you can see here, the muscle wall of the left ventricle is a lot thicker than the right ventricle because this has to push it through the entire body. Okay. So from the left ventricle, the blood is then going to be pushed through the aorta, which sends it to the rest of the body. Remember that these arteries are also going to be thicker and the blood pressure higher. Okay, and we can see that because of how thick this muscular wall of the left ventricle is. Now, the heart, like any other organ, can become diseased if you have an unhealthy lifestyle or if there are genetically predisposed problems with your heart. Now, one of these diseases is coronary heart disease. So this is when the coronary artery that supplies the heart muscles that we were talking about with blood gets blocked. It's going to be blocked by lipid deposits or these fat deposits. So if you have a very high fat diet, and I say fat's more like a high carb diet, okay, you're going to get a lot of cholesterol in your body, in your blood. And that cholesterol can build up. And if it builds up in the coronary artery, the artery that provides your heart with the oxygen it requires, you can get coronary heart disease. This can lead to a heart attack or just pains in your chest and an overall unhealthy heart. So some ways of preventing coronary heart disease. The first one is a stent. Now these stents are little metal meshes, like a little metal cage, okay, that gets inserted into your coronary artery to the point of the blockage. It's then inflated by a balloon to widen that narrowed gap due to cholesterol. Okay. Now, the advantages of this is that it can be done without anesthetic, so it's more like an injection into your vein or into your artery, and then they move it up into that coronary artery or the place of the blockage. Okay, so you don't need to be put under. It's not an incredibly invasive surgery. It has minimal risk. You don't require any medication, and it can be inserted anywhere into the body. Okay, so you can put this stent into a femoral artery or into something in your arm, any artery in the body it can be placed in, and expand the lumen of the artery, expand the narrowed lumen. Some of the disadvantages is that it's very expensive and it requires recovery time, and it needs to be replaced every few years. So other than stents, we can have statins. Now, statins are medications that you take daily to reduce the risk of clotting by slowing fat deposition in the arteries. Okay. Now, why is this good? It's because it's a lot cheaper than surgery. All you have to do is go get the medication. Okay, and you can start it immediately. You don't have to wait for an operation date where you would with a stent. Okay. The disadvantages though is that it can have some nasty side effects. It thins your blood, which can lead to further issues, as well as the fact that you have to remember to take it every day for the rest of your life. So sometimes due to either coronary heart disease or some other genetic disorders, your heart won't be able to provide the pumping action to move the blood through the body, and this is when we need to step in and help it. Okay, so how does this pumping action work exactly? There are a little group of cells called pacemakers. Now, these pacemakers are going to receive electric signals constantly from the brain. Without us thinking about it, our heart pumps. It has to pump at a certain pattern. Okay, so as the atrium pushes it into the ventricle, we don't have the ventricle pushing at the same time. Okay, atrium, ventricle. Those are done by pacemaker cells. Now, sometimes those pacemaker cells can get old and they won't be working as well. This is when you can have a heart attack. Okay, or just heart murmurs, makes you feel very tired just because it's not pumping at full efficiency. Now, what we can do to help this is put in artificial pacemakers. So these are little devices that attach to your heart at certain places, and they are going to send their own electrical impulses, okay, when your heart starts to get a bit tired. So it's not constant, but it will monitor your heart rate, and when it starts getting uneven, it starts showing not the same pattern as it usually would, irregular heartbeats, okay, then the pacemaker will kick in and start controlling the heartbeats for you. Okay. Now the issue is though, this can be rejected, and you're going to be required to take medication every day to prevent this pacemaker from being rejected by your body, because again, it is a foreign object that your body's not going to like if it knows it's there. Okay. Alternatively, you get artificial hearts. Okay. So these in the future might be grown, okay, in a lab, or they could be made to be able to pump your blood. But at the moment, the artificial heart would be more of a complete heart transplant from another patient. Now, this is possible and it has been done, but the issue is you have to have a very good match. And there's always a chance of your entire heart being rejected by your body, which would kill you. So we've talked about the system that moves oxygen and carbon dioxide around the body. But how exactly does that carbon dioxide and oxygen get into the body or get out of the body? This is through the respiratory system. Now, this is not to get confused with respiration. Respiration is the burning of glucose in the presence of oxygen to create energy. Now, the respiratory system is the breathing, okay? Inhalation, exhalation, that is the respiratory system. Okay, now how does this work? Well, when it comes to the chest cavity, Okay. There are two components that are going to control the movement of the chest cavity. We've got our diaphragm and we've got our intercostal muscles that are found around our rib cage. Okay. Now the whole point of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles is to change the pressure inside of our lungs and to change the volume inside of our lungs. Okay. So when it comes to the movement of air, and this happens in the world as well, it moves from a high pressure to a low pressure. Okay. So as we are increasing the volume of our lungs, when we're breathing in, our chest expands outwards, our diaphragm flattens, and this is going to decrease the pressure in our lungs and increase its volume. This is going to cause air from the outside to rush into our lungs. That air is going to be richer, okay, in oxygen. So the oxygen is going to richer in oxygen. So the oxygen is going to go into our blood system and carbon dioxide out. Now when we breathe outwards, our intercostal muscles are going to relax, so they're going to go back down, and our diaphragm is going to move upwards. This is going to decrease the volume, increase the pressure of our lungs, and so the air moves out, and that is exhalation. Okay, so inhalation, diaphragm flattens, rib cage expands. Exhalation, rib cage contracts, relaxes. Okay, diaphragm moves upwards, and we exhale. Okay. So while we are breathing, okay, this gas exchange needs to happen at a certain point between the lungs and the blood. This is going to occur in the alveoli. Now, how are the alveoli in the lungs adapted to this gas exchange? Well, they are very thin, for one, so they're only about one cell layer thick. Okay, so there's only two cell layers between the capillary and the alveoli that the gas needs to diffuse through. They are circular shaped to increase the amount of surface area, and there's a rich supply of blood around them. As you can see in this picture here, there are many capillaries around one alveoli to try and get as much surface area as possible for gas exchange to occur. Now, when it comes to plants, just like animals, they're going to have organs. Okay, these organs are going to be specially adapted to doing a certain function. Okay, now we've done this before, so I'll just go through it quickly. The epidermal tissue, so the skin layer of the plant, covers the surface and creates protection, as well as being see-through or transparent to allow light into the rest of the plant. The palisade mesophyll cells, okay, these are where photosynthesis occurs. They contain the chloroplasts, okay. Spongy mesophills, they have some chloroplasts, so some photosynthesis occurs in here, but it's mainly air sacs and large surface areas for easy diffusion of gases, okay, as well as storage. The xylem and phloem, so the transporters of our plants, okay, xylem is for water and dissolved minerals, while phloem is for sap and for sugars. So phloem is going to be transporting those sugars throughout the plant to wherever they're needed, while the water from the roots is transported via the xylem in one direction, from the roots through the shoots to the leaves, from the leaves outwards as transpiration. And then we have the meristematic tissue. So meristematic tissue, or meristems, is a place where the stem cells in the plant are produced, and this is used for growth. Okay, so these are certain areas where you will find the most growth happening, either at the tips of your roots or at the ends of your shoots. This is meristematic tissue. Okay, so I know I've gone through transport tissues before in previous slides, so I'm just going to add on some information here and summarize it with. So phloem transports sap, your glucose-rich liquid, okay, to the rest of the plant. It is in multi-directions, which is why it has these sieve tubes. It is also living, so it has something called a companion cell, or here they call it a source cell, that is going to allow it to continue its cellular functions while still being mostly hollow. Okay. Now, aphids are little insects that have adapted to drilling into these phloem tubes, okay, and drinking the sap from the plant, thus killing it. Okay, so aphids can be a big issue for plants. Now, xylem carries water. They are dead when they are matured, so they are hollow. It doesn't mention here as well, but they contain lignin, okay, because that water is going to be at a much higher pressure than the phloem sap. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier that the water from xylem is only in one direction. So from the roots to the shoots to the leaves, out into the environment. Now, out through where exactly? Water loss is mainly through the stomata. Okay, stomata are these little mouths. Do I have a pointer here? Yes. These little mouths, mouth-shaped things on the bottom of our leaf. Okay. And what their purpose is controlling the amount of water loss. So this is known as transpiration. This is water being lost through the leaves, through the stomata. Okay. Now this transpiration is also going to be what pulls water up from the roots to the leaves. As the water leaves, it makes space for more water, and through capillary action, that water is going to be pulled up from the roots. Okay, this is known as transpiration stream. Okay. So what affects transpiration? What affects this water loss through the stomata and through these guard cells? Okay, the first is going to be an increase in temperature. As an increase in temperature occurs, photosynthesis is going to increase. Okay, the rate at which it's going to occur increases, and therefore more carbon dioxide is required. So these stomata are going to open up more. Okay, this is then going to allow more water loss, as well as the fact that it being hot, it's going to evaporate a lot quicker, also increasing transpiration. An increase in humidity, so a higher concentration of water outside of the cell means that there's not going to be as much transpiration, as there won't be as much evaporation, as that concentration gradient is not going to be as high. Okay, so a higher humidity leads to less transpiration. Increase in wind, so wind is going to take those droplets, those microscopic little droplets from the stomata away, thus increasing transpiration. Okay, and an increase in light intensity will increase photosynthesis and therefore increase carbon dioxide requirement. Therefore the stomata are going to open more and there's going to be more water loss, increasing transpiration. So, mentioned most of this already. These stomata are going to be controlled by guard cells. Now these guard cells are either going to open or close depending on light, because when there is light there is photosynthesis, therefore they need to open to allow carbon dioxide into the leaf. It's also going to be minimizing water loss as much as possible. So if it gets a bit too hot, these stomata are going to close, okay, to prevent the plant from dehydrating. And there's something called a photometer. Now a photometer is a device that we use to measure the uptake of water from the plant. Okay, so a photometer is basically going to show us how much transpiration is happening, and it does this using a little gas bubble that is going to move depending on the water that is being used by the plant. Okay, so let me see if I can get this pointer. So as water is sucked up by the plant and taken out into the air, this little gas bubble is going to move, and then we can then measure the rate of transpiration. So we can change the environmental conditions and see how quickly or slowly that gas bubble moves. Okay, my name is Cameron, and this has been Organizing Plants and Animals, I believe it was. And I'll see you in the next lesson.